Hello, welcome back to my channel. And I finished two books recently, two short books, and I loved them. Both of these books are translated fiction. So I'm going to talk about this one first. This is by Philippe Besson, a French writer. This is called Lie With Me. This book was originally written in French, translated to English by Molly Ringwald. And this book was published sometime in 2017, I think, if I'm not mistaken. 2017 in French. This book, it's, I would say that this book is kind of a simple book. This book is about the experience of a teenager. So basically, this teenager lives in a small town, and he realizes that he likes boys, but at the same time, he's also kind of nerdy. He's not very social, but there's this one particular boy in school that he has a particular crush on, named Thomas Andrieu. And so basically, this book is about his developing relationship with this Thomas Andrieu, and how that relationship would eventually just kind of like forms like a formative experience in his youth, especially when it comes to things like relationships and also political awakening. Now, how does this relationship actually occur? So this is kind of like the part where I find that this book have certain elements that I think is kind of a bit weak in the sense that this book uses a bunch of narrative elements that feel a little bit cliched. Now, I mentioned earlier that the main character, the narrator, right, this teenage boy, 17-year-old boy, he is kind of nerdy, and he doesn't really, isn't really the one to make the first move. Well, what happens in this story of the book is how his relationship with the boy that he's crushing on, right, how that relationship happens is because Thomas Andrieu actually approaches him, and they begin this relationship with each other. So basically, his crush actually talks to him first, and I'm like, when I was reading that, I was like, that rarely happens. Yeah. Anyway, that was pretty dramatic, but the story just kind of takes off from there. And there were going to be a few elements at the later part of the story, which can feel kind of predictable, and well, probably less cliched compared to like the crush approaching the main character. But still, there are going to be plot points that are kind of well, like I said, really predictable. And it gets kind of dramatic towards the end as well. But I'm not going to talk about that. That being said, even though I do think that this book has those elements going on, right, I still do think that this book was a pretty nice book. In fact, I probably would rate it like at least 4.5 out of 5 stars, or even 5 stars, just to be that's what I put on Goodreads, because it doesn't allow half stars. And that is because I think there are certain parts of this book that allowed me to look past those narrative related shortcomings that I just mentioned. I was able to look past them because there were other things that I think this book really excels in. Okay, number one, well, regarding those shortcomings, this book actually is kind of self-aware about those things. It actually there is a certain sense of irreverence whenever this book kind of casually mentions that, how the occurrence between the teenage boy and his crush kind of feels like something that happens in movies or stories and stuff like that. Like, there's almost an admission of how implausible it could be. Which is which is kind of like, I feel like it is like a way of this book is kind of ingratiating itself with me, the reader. So I kind of like that part. Another part that I really appreciate about this book is also, while this book presents itself as some kind of a love story, it also doubles as a coming-of-age story with love story, with the romance as a fairly important core, but at the same time, there is also another parallel important element that runs along that romance, and that would be the political awakening of the main character, and also the kind of awareness that he gains regarding his social environment, right? Because of the relationship that he has with this crush of his. And I think the way that is written makes this romance feels much deeper, because it's not just about the romance itself, it's not just about the attraction itself, but it also is about the implication of that attraction and how that implication actually shapes the character, and so you end up with a character that is very nicely developed. Just for example, how this is kind of explored in this book is, so basically the main character comes from a family whose father, his father is actually an educator. So his father actually has quite a I would say a respectable job, a high standing job, whereas the boy that he's crushing on, his family works at the farm, at the vineyard, and this boy, his crush, is expected to continue the work of his family at the vineyard. So there's already this kind of differences in their social standing, and also because of the fact that there are differences in these social standing and the occupations of their fathers. There is also different expectations when it comes to things like masculinity or a person's presentation, how they would sort of perform their interpretation of masculinity. And this is also something that is kind of explored in the relationship between these two boys, and how that kind of misalignment actually forms one of the actually kind of triggers further awareness in the main character. And the awareness of the main character also doesn't happen like in a very linear way. Like you can also see that his growth is it feels organic. Like it's not very fast, but it comes with bumps. So I kind of appreciate that as well. Okay, so the other thing that I really appreciate about this book, I would say focuses more on the latter part of this book. So this book has 3 parts. The first part, which is the longest one, probably occupies like almost half of this novel. It actually focuses on the youth of these 2 boys when they are 17 years old, and the romance that they had when they were that age. So the second and the third part actually focuses on the narrator when he's an older man. And it is in these 2 parts, part 2 and part 3, is where we see the implication of this relationship, like the impact of this relationship on this narrator as an older man. And I would say the kind of themes that this book explores, if you're familiar with queer stories or stories that are really centered around LGBTQ issues, this theme would be something that you see, well, almost all the time. Almost as if you can almost call it a timeless theme, and that is the fact that queer people have to really go to great lengths to hide themselves and basically just lie to society all the time, or almost all the time, about who they are inside, depending on where they live, right? And so this is basically the main theme of this novel. I mean, you can see it in the title, it's Lie With Me, isn't it? Lies and untrue. And yeah, if you're familiar with gay stories or queer stories, then this is something that isn't particularly new. But because of the fact that this theme still feels very much relevant even until today, there is something about that just makes this book feels kind of powerful. It is able to kind of I would say tug at your heartstrings in a way, because of how relevant this theme is, right? Even though so many narratives have explored this theme. And the way that is written here also is quite sad. And I feel like it's going to hit you differently. Depends on what kind of society you find yourself in, whether that society is very much accepting of queer people, or if you happen to be in a society where queerness is outlawed or at least frowned upon, right? So I feel like this book is going to hit you differently, probably, and also it depends on your own attitudes towards the LGBTQ community. If you are anti, then I suppose this book is not going to do anything to your stone cold heart. Anyway, I would say it's a wonderful book. It doesn't really explore anything particularly new or challenging to me. In fact, I would say that much of the much of the things in this book, from the themes to the plot, those things all feel very familiar. Like it's like a rehashing of a very common narrative, but I think it is still able to kind of radiates the kind of energy, you know what I mean, because of how it is written. So yeah, this one was a nice one. I really enjoyed this. So moving on to the next book, I want to talk about The Hunting Gun. So this is by Yasushi Inoue. This book was published in 30s, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, no. It was published sometime in the 40s, I guess. And this book was originally written in Japanese, translated to English by Michael Emmerich. This book is actually my second book by Yasushi Inoue. The first one was something that I read last year. It's called Bullfight. But I don't think I've talked about it on BookTube, because I also read it around the time when I was like kind of away from BookTube, so I didn't get to talk about it. But maybe I'll talk about it soon, because I love that book, and it was such a surprising thing that I actually ended up loving that book. I'm going to talk about that book some other time. So for now, I'll be talking about The Hunting Gun. So The Hunting Gun is a novella. It's very short, and basically the main plot line of The Hunting Gun is actually about this man named Josuke. He comes from a fairly rich family, but the thing is, he cheats on his wife with his wife's older cousin. So basically, that's the plot of this book. It's really simple. It's a novella. It's really simple. Basically, it's about Josuke's infidelity. But the way that this story is presented is, I would say, very interesting, and kind of makes you engage with it, or at least wanting to engage with it in a much deeper level. So there's actually a framing narrative to this main infidelity plot. So the framing narrative actually goes something like this. You have a poet, a nameless poet. Basically what happens is that this poet and his friend just kind of like trying to catch up with each other. His friend is running a magazine called The Hunter's Friends. Basically, it's kind of like a magazine for the Hunters Club, people who enjoys hunting as hobbies, that kind of magazine. And his friend kind of like asked him to submit something, like a poem or whatever, to this magazine so they can publish it, just for them to reconnect, right? And so this poet ends up submitting a prose poem to this magazine, and in this prose poem he is describing kind of like a scene in which he encounters a hunter carrying a hunting gun, and the kind of cold and desolate emotions that he feels upon the encounter of this man, or something like that. And so he submits this prose poem, and his friend is kind of like feeling a bit awkward about this poem, because this poem doesn't really put hunting or the hunting gun in really positive light. So I do find that this framing narrative low-key hilarious, and so things kind of feels kind of awkward with a friend, and then the poet is kind of like slightly freaking out because he's expecting that the readers of the magazine is going to come up with like angry letters about this poem that he writes, but he didn't get any he doesn't get any angry letters, but he gets a letter from a man who introduces himself as Josuke. And Josuke says he was actually the man that the poet encounters a few months ago. He was actually the subject that the poet writes in his poem. And yeah, and because the poem was actually written based on the poet's like encounter with someone like a few months ago. And so the poet was like, oh my gosh. But basically this man named Josuke in his letter continues saying that the poem touches him in a certain way, and something has happened in his life as well that is kind of related to that. And so with this letter that he sends to the poet, like about how he's feeling touched by all that, how the poem really spoke to him, right? He also attached 3 different letters that will kind of shed light on what kind of a person Josuke is. And so these 3 letters are written from perspectives of 3 different women. So the first letter was actually from the perspective of the of Josuke's mistress's daughter named Shoko. The second letter is the letter from Josuke's wife Midori, and the third letter comes from Josuke's mistress named Saiko. And when you read these different, so basically we these letters lead us to the main plot of the story, and reading these 3 letters, right, we kind of we now see what is really going on with this whole infidelity drama that is happening. But the thing is, this drama is something that is quiet, right? But instead, we're while on the outside, we're looking at how this drama unfolds through the point of views of these 3 different characters. The main thing about the main meat of these 3 letters is how these 3 different women responded to the knowledge or the act of this infidelity, and how it affected them and how they respond to it. And the way that they respond to it is not simply just based on the fact that a case or an act of infidelity is being carried out. It goes beyond that. They respond to that act because of certain things that have happened to, either things that have happened to them in the past or things that are happening to them at the moment. And those things, either in the past or in the present, those would eventually lead these 3 different women to do certain things, to take certain actions, and form their motivations. And so this book is, even though it's quite short, but the way that the arrangement of of these different sections, how they all just come together, feel very interesting to me. There's something very refreshing when you read this book. In a way, it is kind of telling us what kind of a person Josuke is through the eyes of 3 different female characters close to him. But at the same time, we also get to learn more about these female characters as well, especially the wife Midori and also the mistress Saiko. And even though we know that an act of infidelity has happened, but somehow we are able to relate, well, not exactly relate, we are able to sympathize and empathize with these characters. And I would say more importantly with Saiko, because she is part of the, part of the party who's doing the, who commits this infidelity, right? Who participates in it. But somehow we are able to kind of understand where she's coming from, because from her letter we learn more about what has really happened to her in her life and all that. So yeah, I do think this book, even though it's like really short, I feel like it is super engaging, and yeah, it kind of makes you think about like the kind of ways in which you present a story or present a character, or present a particular event. Like I don't know, I just find it to be kind of creative. Like, how can people do something like that? You know, how can people write something like that? I can never. Anyway, yeah, two really interesting books, and I'm glad I've read these. And yeah, I wonder if you guys have read these, and if you have, let me know what you think about these two books. Let me know if you are interested in reading these. I don't really have any current reads with me right now. I mean, I have this one. I just started a few pages earlier. This is called Karnak Café by Naguib Mahfouz, translated from Arabic to English by Roger Allen. And as you can see, it is also a very thin book. I am trying to finish this as quickly as possible because I need to return this book to the library this coming week. So yeah, procrastination. Anyway, I'll see you again in a different video. Thank you for listening, and I hope you guys are fine, all well, everything is all nice, and see you guys next time. Bye.